And welcome to another edition of Two Steps Ahead Podcast. Two Steps Ahead Podcast encouraging you to take your passion, make it happen, let yourself be great. I'm Son Edom. Coming up on the show a little bit later, we're going to talk about overcoming barriers, boundaries, things that keep us from getting where we want to be. Also, technology and how it affects kids, and maybe some late developments that might help kids in the area of technology. But how does it affect them? But starting things off, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory on public health, the public health crisis of firearm violence in the United States. Now, I think we can all agree that there is violence in the United States, that people do use guns. But where he goes political is what I want to focus on. So the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, released a landmark Surgeon General's advisory on firearm violence, declaring firearm violence in America is a public health crisis. Firearm violence is pervasive, with more than 54% of U.S. adults or their family members having experienced a firearm-related incident in their lives, he says. Over the last decade, the number of people who have died from firearm-related injuries, including suicides, homicides, and accidental deaths, has been on the rise. And firearm violence is now the leading cause of death among children and adolescents. This is specifically what he had to say.
What is especially devastating is how this has affected our children. Firearm violence has become the number one cause of death among children and adolescents, more than car accidents or drug overdoses. I've sat with parents who've lost a child to firearm violence. I've listened to their stories and felt their pain as they describe the holes in their hearts. As a father, I know a parent's worst nightmare is to lose a child, to feel like you can't protect your child from harm. Beyond these precious lives that are lost to firearm violence, there are wider ripples of harm to those who are injured, who witness the incidents, who live in urban and rural communities where such violence takes place, and who constantly read and hear about firearm violence in the news. The collective trauma and fear that Americans are experiencing is contributing to the mental health challenges that we are facing today.
So bringing awareness to gun violence, I guess, is his point. But when they go straight to this affect kids more than anybody else, it becomes more of a political statement, because immediately you can turn around and point to other things, which we'll get to, as to if you're so concerned about the welfare of kids and children and adolescents with guns, well, why aren't you doing anything about these other areas? But first, let's take a look at just guns in general. Now, people keep saying that guns kill people when, in fact, we all know people kill people. If you put a gun on a table, the gun will not discharge unless somebody picks it up and actually pulls the trigger. You take a look at California, they have some of the strictest gun laws. Yet, according to the FBI, a report on active shooting incidents in 2021, the year that they, I guess, have the latest information, California is the number one state for active shooting incidents in 2021, even though they have the strictest gun laws. They have gun laws where you have to, in California, to get a gun, first of all, what you have to do is you have to take if you're going to say, let's get a firearm, okay, like a handgun, a pistol, not a long gun, not a rifle, but a pistol, handgun. You have to take a test. And if you pass the test, it's like 25 questions or something, and you can, miss 5. Then you have a firearms permit. That firearms permit then will allow you to purchase a gun. Without that firearms permit, you cannot purchase a gun. Then you can go and buy a gun, a handgun. Then you have to wait, at least the last time I checked, it was 10 days. DOJ background, FBI background, and then you have to wait your waiting period, and then you can pick up your handgun, and then that's it. I know they've added some how many you can buy in a certain time frame laws as well. And they've also added now ammunition, where you have to have the same kind of permit, so to speak, to purchase ammunition. So they put a lot of restrictions on the purchasing of guns and ammunition, especially over the last few years. And then on top of it, they want to limit how many bullets you can put in a magazine for your pistol, your handgun, and all these other things. And you've heard about the Supreme Court bump stock and all this. So there's been a lot of effort to try to rein in guns and people's use of guns in states across this country, but California leads the way. They have universal background checks, like I mentioned, assault weapons ban, a high capacity magazine ban, a 10-day waiting period on gun purchases. They now have a red flag law, a gun registration requirement, which for good cause, you can tell somebody that you can't have a gun because we think you have mental health issues, or perhaps you're going to use it for a crime. There is a ban on K through 12 teachers being armed on campuses. You can't carry a gun on college campuses, even for self-defense purposes. If you want to get a concealed carry permit, then you have to have some sort of threat to you, and you have to be able to demonstrate that threat. And then now the purchase of ammunition has a background check requirement, and you can limit, or it has a limitations on the number of guns a law-abiding citizen can purchase in a given month. So those are all the controls that we talked about just a minute ago. And additionally, ammunition purchases are only allowed if made through a state-approved vendor. At one point, you were able to go online and purchase ammunition, and now you couldn't do that because they wouldn't be able to deliver to zip codes in California. And so now you have to go through a vendor because they keep track of it. So let's talk about how many gun-related injuries in the United States each year, since the Surgeon General suggested that kids are the biggest group to suffer from it. Well, again, going back to 2021, which I guess is the latest information that they have, the most recent year for which complete data is available, there were 48,830 people that died from gun-related injuries in the U.S., this according to the CDC. Now, any person dying from a gun death, or any person dying, period, is obviously a bad thing, and we want to avoid that. However, it is inevitable because of the country we live in and the evil that exists in this country. There are going to be people that will get their hands on guns and will use them in a bad way. So the figure of 48,830 includes guns for people that use them for murder, for suicides, and then I guess they call it less common types of gun-related deaths, which were maybe accidental or used by law enforcement. I guess law enforcement gets into a shootout with a bad guy, and the bad guy, his life ends. And so there's a lot of different variations of gun-related deaths that the CDC puts out there. 54% of all gun-related deaths were, well, of those 54%, you had suicide being the biggest, 26,328. So 54% of people have been affected, according to the Surgeon General, in some way by guns and gun-related injuries. And 54% of those injuries are suicide. So again, we go back to the mental health issue. We definitely need to get mental health in order, but it's not as sexy as gun control. So therefore it slides away. Remember, during the pandemic, it became front and center, mental health, but now it's kind of taken the back burner, or been put on the back burner, until most recently with the debate. And now you see Joe Biden and his cognitive inability to express thought. And so maybe mental health will be back on the front burner, but hopefully in a good way. 43% of gun-related deaths were murders, according to the CDC, and the remaining were accidental, which were about 549, law enforcement 537, or undetermined circumstances 458. So suicide and murder make up the biggest percentage of that pie. About 8 in 10 U.S. murders in 2021, or 81%, involved a firearm. And then it goes on to establish more stats. So that is from the CDC. You can go look it up. I know a lot of people disagree on gun control, and they think guns are bad. We need to do away with them. And people spout all kinds of information. out there, a lot of misleading information, but that right there is what you can find on the CDC website or any number of legitimate official websites. Okay. So you've got that. You've got the 54% of that 48,000 gun-related deaths, suicide. Then you have the next biggest section of the pie being murder, and then a small percentage being other things. So according to the CDC, and you take a look at drugs, 48,000 gun-related deaths, and that's everybody. Remember, the Surgeon General is talking about, in this one particular clip, about how it affects kids. This is all numbers, okay? Not just kids, all numbers, no matter what the demographic is. There were, according to the CDC, 107,622 drug overdose deaths in the United States during 2021. 15% of those deaths, or it's been a 15% increase in those deaths from 93,655 that were in 2020. So you have an increase. So overdose deaths rose 30% from 2019 to 2020, and then increased from 2020 to 2021. Opioids, such as fentanyl, had in 2021 over 71,000 deaths. Methamphetamines, 32,800. Cocaine, 24,500. And prescription, 13,500. So drug overdoses increasing. Does it include kids and young people, adolescents? Doesn't break it down specifically, but yes, I would believe it does. And fentanyl being the dangerous one of them all, because you can just be in the vicinity and be affected in a negative. In fact, I just remembered now that there are some places, some schools and other places with young people, and just people in general, but mainly young people, because they don't know where the fentanyl is coming from, that you have these like EpiPens and whatever they use to kind of revive people from a fentanyl exposure. They have them readily available in school districts across the country because it is so rampant, because it is so ongoing of a problem. Of course, now we're talking about kids and kids-related deaths. According to the Surgeon General, he said that the biggest group of people, or that gun-related deaths, is the biggest reason why kids die in America these days. But again, we have to go back to abortion. I know it's a hot button issue. People say it's apples and oranges or whatever you want to compare them to, that gun deaths and abortion is different. Abortions are women's right to choose, all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is that when you have an abortion, you are killing a child, plain and simple. 625,978 abortions in 2021 were reported by the CDC. More than 1 million abortions were provided in the U.S. in 2023. Number keeps going up. The majority finding from a report published by the Guttmacher Institute not too long ago shows the numbers increasing. So now you can take a look at all of this stuff, okay? Whether it's gun violence, whether it's drugs, whether it's abortion, and you see that there is a major assault on kids these days, no matter what it is. Kids are having a hard time being kids. Whether you're being introduced to LGBT transgendered ideology, whether it's trans women, men playing women's sports, what bathroom you use. We have not only a gun problem, if you want to call it that, and I'm not going to dispute the fact that guns affect kids. I'm not going to dispute that. What I don't like to see in these situations is kids being used as political pawns, and then we're supposed to have like some knee-jerk reaction to get rid of guns because it affects kids, when we have a fentanyl crisis, an opioid crisis, a drug crisis, with the southern border being wide open and more drugs being brought into this country. When you have abortion running rampant, continuing to increase year by year, when you have the transgender LGBT ideology calling for kids having gender sex assignment surgery, right? Basically mutilating your body. When you're allowed to bring kids across state lines for an abortion without parental consent. In fact, now in schools, if you don't have to tell parents that their kids are now using different pronouns. So you've taken parental control, parental authority over kids away from parents. You've indoctrinating them with all kinds of ideology. You've got people clamoring and complaining about 10 Commandments being put in schools, but yet all this other stuff is going on. When are we going to sit down and look at the issue of protecting kids and say we need to protect kids? For example, if you are for women's rights and you are for the advancement of women, why aren't you clamoring and making a lot of noise and protesting and marching on Washington for the release of the Epstein Johns? Have that list be revealed. Aren't you for stopping pedophiles, sex traffickers? Why isn't Maxwell, Epstein's girlfriend, why isn't she forced to turn over the book and release it? Why did she get off scot-free pretty much, just living in Club Fed, doing some easy time? So when you take, and a majority of, not always, but there is a big proponent of sex trafficking that is kids, boys and girls. So you take a look at all of these different areas, and you would have to say that it's not just guns. It's not just one thing or another, but when you put these things together, I'm surprised we even have children surviving. And then let's put on top of that the education system, which we talked about before, that states that less than 50% of kids across the country are not proficient in grade level math, grade level reading, now grade level science. Basically, our education system is falling apart. What are we doing? Kids in general are struggling and suffering, and that's going to affect us for generations to come unless we take a look at this on a broader picture. We stop politicizing kids and having them be political pawns, and we start to do something to protect kids across the country. So you might ask yourself, the Second Amendment, it's gone back and forth, right? A lot of states have now gone to constitutional carry, which means you don't even need a permit. That's not the case in California. California continues to have stronger, stricter laws, but other states have gone to constitutional carry. And there was talks that now that everybody's carrying a gun, there'd be OK Corral shootouts right and left all across the country. Hasn't happened. Hasn't happened at all. But drug overdoses are increasing. Abortions are increasing. Other harm towards children are increasing. Our kids being uneducated, the percentage of kids being uneducated, the percentage of kids being illiterate, the percentage of kids not being able to do whatever it is that's required of them at grade level continues to rise. That's your new pandemic. That's your new epidemic, is the assault on kids. So again, people go back to the argument over the Second Amendment. Recently, the Supreme Court has made some rulings in favor of the Second Amendment. So what exactly is the Second Amendment? How does it apply to us today? Shedding a little light on the subject, let's go to Ben Shapiro.
So there's this rumor that's been going around on the left that the Second Amendment has lived past its use state, that it's expired. There's no reason for us to worry about the right to keep and bear arms anymore. Well, the right to keep and bear arms is undergirded by two separate rights, the right to personal self-defense and the right to protect your rights. So the right to self-defense pre-exists government. Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, philosophers who were respected by the Founding Fathers, particularly Locke, talked about the fundamental right of any human being being your right to self-preservation, your right to self-defense. And what Locke had to say about that was that when a government is formed, in a state of nature, you have the right to self-defense. When a government is formed, you don't give up that right to the government. Hobbes thought you gave up that right to the government. Now it was the government's job to protect you. Locke said it is the government's job to protect you, but that's just because the government can organize better. You do not give up your personal right to self-preservation when a government is formed. That right cannot be outsourced. It is inalienable. It's the right to life, liberty, property. According to John Locke, and as codified in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And it's the government's job to protect those rights, not to take away your own ability to protect your own rights. Okay, the right to protect your rights is the second right that is protected by the Constitution of the United States. Okay, the Declaration of Independence says, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these rights, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. And the founders were very clear that this right included the ability to have arms. Alexander Hamilton wrote glowingly about the ability of people to own arms in Federalist 46. He praised, quote, the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation. He, like all the other founders, saw ownership of arms as a check on tyranny. So, you need a gun for two reasons. One, somebody's coming into your house, you need to shoot them. And two, you have a tyrannical government, and you must have the arms available to form, what they call in the Constitution, a well-regulated militia to prevent government tyranny and to prevent foreign intrusion.
There you go, civics lesson on the Second Amendment in 2 minutes or less. But that's the whole point. The whole point of guns is to protect yourself, because you do have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to rise up against a tyrannical government. That was the main purpose of the Second Amendment. Could you imagine what this country would be like if the citizenry of this country, the citizens, did not have guns? This would be a completely different country. The two things keeping this country together so far is the Second Amendment and states' rights. That's it. Those two things allow for areas of the country to still be independent and do their thing without the influence of the federal government dictating to them what they do. Look at the pandemic and look what happened there. Forced vaccinations, forced masking, all these other things that were unconstitutional, ruled unconstitutional after the fact. Look at all these other countries that were forced to do things. Look at China. All the stuff that they go through just on a daily basis. North Korea, what they go through on a daily basis, because they don't have any way to thwart government dictatorship. Cuba, another place. Venezuela, all these other places. And you're starting to see now a push back towards conservative ideas. Look what happened with the elections in France. Apparently they're rioting and protesting over there because the conservative wing of the party won. Look what's going on in Canada, in the UK, here in the United States, the Supreme Court making some very conservative rulings. So it's important that government overreach is halted, which we're starting to see, which is causing all kinds of liberals to have a meltdown. And that's why we can't when we get back to the kids, that's why we can't protect kids like we want to, because they become a pawn in this political agenda that a certain group of people want in this country. They want to be able to push kids into ideologies that are harmful to them. They want to push kids to have surgeries and things that they can't change back to. Quick story. Mike Penna was a sports writer for a newspaper in Los Angeles, and apparently he was thinking that he was transgendered. So he stepped away and he did his transition. He came back as a female sports writer for the newspaper, changed his name and everything. Then he struggled with that. I guess he went back to being Mike Penner, and then ultimately committed suicide. See, when he was transitioned, and we've talked about it many times, he was being lauded and applauded. He was being praised for doing it. But when he transitioned back, he was now a turncoat. He was now somebody that was turning his back on this ideology, and it ended up costing him his life. Now, that's an adult trying to maneuver this. And there are many examples out there. You can do your internet search and find all these stories, tragic endings to people that were confused, went through surgery, didn't like the way the outcome was. I think the only successful one that's out in the mainstream is Caitlyn Jenner. For some reason, Caitlyn Jenner seems to be doing okay. But there's a lot of other people that aren't. So you have to take a look at it from the perspective of what's affecting these young kids. Is it going to change? And keep in mind, the other thing too is that a lot of people will sit there and spout, depending on what it is that they're trying to advocate for or against, that the mind of a human isn't fully developed in rationale, reasoning, that type of thing until you're about 26. That was the justification for moving guns to being 21, for drinking laws to being 21, for voting age to be 18. I mean, everything has an age limit to it before you can do something. Driving is 16, but yet apparently changing your gender at any age is okay. Apparently taking someone and getting an abortion without parental consent or notification. Forget about the rapist and the statutory rape that took place, because we don't care about that. We just want that abortion number getting up. Forget about the fact that kids are failing dramatically in schools, but we're just passing them along. You got all these things going on, and all we can sit there is look at guns and say guns is the problem why kids are dying today. You need someone to step up and be like, we've got this whole thing that we need to address, and that is the dangers that society puts on kids. The next one, which is in full frontal assault, is that parents are giving their children phones and tablets to soothe their temper, to babysit them. Technology, kids and technology. Recent research finds that practices of giving your child, especially younger ones, phones and tablets to soothe their temper tantrums causes them to not have the ability to regulate their emotions. Parents are putting their children at risk for having anger management problems and then problematic screen use later in life. Tantrums cannot be cured by digital devices, says the study's author from a university in Budapest, Hungary. Children have to learn how to manage their negative emotions for themselves. They need the help of their parents during the learning process and not the help from a digital device. Is that not true? They need the help of their parents during this learning process, not the help of a digital device. Technology, digital devices, now becoming AI. That is what is raising our kids. I've seen many times in schools where like an iPad can be used for positive reinforcement. But then once you take the iPad away after the allotted time for the reward is up, a tantrum is thrown because the child does not understand or can't regulate with the fact that their time is up and they need to go back to doing schoolwork. So the tantrum is thrown. And the whole idea of the iPad for a reward is now out the window because it's causing further behavior problems. So in a new study published recently in Frontiers in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, researchers from Hungary and Canada surveyed nearly 300 parents of children ages 2 to 5 and gauged their media use and followed up a year later. They found that children who were more prone to anger had parents who used smartphones and tablets to calm them down. These children also typically exhibited more frequent and intense anger responses and displayed poorer anger and frustration management skills a year later upon the follow-up, and this took place back in 21-22. They had higher levels of anger and were worse at exhibiting purposeful control of their emotions. According to the study, giving a child a digital device to calm a tantrum may increase device dependence and the risk of problematic media use. The author compared this phenomena to a positive feedback loop. Device management leads to more tantrums and outbursts, which leads to even more screen use. So you've got studies showing that now kids and their devices are causing problems, especially more specifically in the area of anger. Throwing a tablet, throwing a smartphone in front of your kids is a bad idea. In fact, some people are calling for the limitations and even turning off technology for young people.
You know, over the years, I've noticed in my practice that children are becoming more anxious. They're becoming more depressed. And according to worldwide statistics, that's actually quite consistent with everything that we're seeing worldwide. And I think it's because we are, as a society, as a family, are not really thinking about how we are relating to each other anymore. We are relying too much on social media and not enough on social contact with each other. We think that by Skyping someone or by Facebooking someone, that we have actually had some sort of interaction with them that is actually of worth. I think it's important that we see that, yes, those things are actually good for connecting with people, but they cannot replace human thought, human emotion, human energy exchange. So as parents, I would really encourage you to think about, a few things when you are thinking about how do we manage and relate to electronics in our family. One, take a look in the mirror. How are you dealing with electronics? Is it sitting right next to you at the dinner table? Is it going with you into the washroom? What are you doing with this, piece of electronic or device that you have that actually could be quite unhealthy? Because children are actually going to do exactly what you do. Secondly, I would say, establish a clear set of rules. This could be simple as we're not going to have electronics 2 hours prior to the bedtime because we know that that actually affects sleep quite a lot. Or it could be that we won't have electronics in the bedroom or at the dinner table or in the car. All of these places are where you can actually have good, hearty, engaged conversations. So have some rules and, don't just wing it. And lastly, I know it's hard, I know it's painful, and it's anxiety provoking, but turn it off and put it away. All of you and all of the whole family, especially when you are actually having places where you could be engaging in deep, meaningful, intimate conversations. I know children will come to you, oh, I'm bored, or oh, dad, can't really think of anything to do. But we have to keep in mind that creativity is born out of boredom. So keeping all of those things in mind, I think, is critical as we move into an era where electronics are just going to be a part of our daily life. And if we don't think of a plan, we don't have an idea of how we're going to approach that, we're really risking a lot. We're risking human connection, and we're actually risking humanity as a whole.
Creativity born out of boredom. Is that not true? If you lived in the pre-technology days, you had to go outside and find things to do, right? You couldn't just sit on your phone and scroll through your phone. You had to go find something to do. And you came up with some pretty creative, often sometimes pretty stupid things to do. Surprised that some of us are still alive. But you had to find something to do, right? You had to be creative. Now we rely on social media and we think that's social context. We think that, oh, I sent a message or I looked at somebody's Instagram page or I had some sort of connection online. Therefore, I've had social contact. That's not the case. And have you tried turning off your device, putting it in the other room? I mean, especially nowadays, is there anything really on there that you have to see? Probably not. I mean, take a look at social media like TikTok. I don't know about you, but for some reason, mine has gone to that so-called dark side, and it's just a bunch of liberals whining about how bad the country is because they're not getting their way. That's all it is. A bunch of people panicking now. All of a sudden, we have like dirty air, toxic water. Breastfeeding moms are apparently at risk now, and all these bad things going on because of some Supreme Court rulings that rein back federal government. It's the end of the world, and all they do is go on there and bitch and moan and complain. Is there anything that we need to hear about that? What about picking up the phone and calling somebody? What about sending a letter? I know it's archaic, but personal conversation. That's why a lot of people struggle and suffer with interaction, personal interaction, whether it be the dating life, whether it be the job, whatever it is. People have a hard time interacting because they're used to sitting and pounding on a keyboard. If you're outraged, you're going to pound on a keyboard, run to social media, do some video technology that allows you to spew your whatever it is you're mad about with no ramifications. You did that in person to person, it would not be tolerated. And so people lose out on that social context. They lose out on that social contact, and they lose out on just what it's like to be able to communicate and interact with other people. So now imagine kids when they're trying to be, you have to teach them to be social. They're going through that social learning stage of life. And each step of the way is a new lesson, but they're learning it from technology. So the recommendations, look at what you're doing. If you don't want your kids doing something, maybe you should not do it. Set rules for the kids and make them abide by it. Be tough. Don't give in. And then turn it off. Can you set your phone down and walk away and turn it off? Maybe you should try it. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. Go outside. See what you can do. You might be surprised at the difference your life is, because we've talked about social media on here quite a bit. It leads to depression. It leads to anger. It leads to all sorts of negativity. It also leads to things like cyberbullying. So even though the past few decades, as technology has become more and more of the forefront and people can't regulate themselves anymore, especially kids, because they just go to social media and pop off. The other thing we're starting to find is that you've got cyberbullying. And when you get back to that gun-related suicide deaths, social media could be a contributing factor to that and the increase, because not a lot comes from social media anymore these days. There used to be a lot of good things, but not so much anymore. So there's a lady, Maureen Moloch. She has spent the last 8 years advocating for online safety for children. In Texas, her son David was a teenager, basketball player, got hurt, so spent his time on social media while he was rehabbing, and eventually became cyberbullied and took his own life. She was able to push for a new law called David's Law in the state of Texas. It makes cyberbullying a criminal offense and allows victims to seek injunctive relief against social media accounts used to harass or bully minors. So it's not going after the social media companies, but the accounts, the people that create the accounts and do the cyberbullying. It was passed in 2016, 2017. And now she's focusing her efforts on the Kids Online Safety Act, a bill that requires social media companies to take measures to prevent the spread of harmful content, including whatever harmful content might be that is related to suicide, eating disorders, bullying, and drugs. The bill would require tech companies to allow minors to limit the category of recommendations or opt out of personalized recommendation systems that facilitate infinite scrolling. And apparently she's working on this and she is making progress. So why not put out a public health message on social media? Because that's the other place that is causing kids, causing adolescents, causing people to have depression. Suicide has gone way up in the social media age with young tweens. You can go back and listen to any number of shows we've done on social media, and you know that anger, depression, all things negative has increased. Suicide has gone up, especially among tweens, young adolescents. There's not a whole lot of positive things. Now, I'm all for communication. I'm all for having a phone in this day and age. There's no reason to go to a pay phone if they still exist. Make a collect call if you can still do that. And then quickly say, I need a ride, come pick me up, before they accept the collect call. So you have to have the charges. So you can have a phone. But now companies, phone companies, at least a few of them that I've talked to when I've gone into stores to look at different devices, a lot of them don't make those flip phone type things anymore. It's all smartphones. So it's designed for people to have to purchase them, because the flip phone, which is just a phone and a call, I mean, you might have to try some secondary and tertiary phone companies that may still have them. But the big ones don't, because they want the $800,000-$900,000 for phones, $200,000 phones, or whatever it is. Phones oftentimes costing more than other things. So there have been calls recently for the warning label, the Surgeon General's warning label, to be put on social media platforms that were similar to the warning of tobacco products, because it is an addiction. Social media is an addiction. There's no doubt about it. It's been proven time and time again. All sorts of data, all sorts of surveys, all sorts of studies. Social media is an addiction. Should it not require a Surgeon General's warning, much like tobacco did and some of these other entities? But you as the adult, you as the person that's in charge of the adolescent's phone, the adolescent's or the youth's social media, you got to set the standards. What do you want your kids to be like? And with all of this, the attack, the assault on social media, on kids from social media, if you want to throw guns in there, you want to throw the drug crisis, opioid, fentanyl, if you want to throw in the abortion, you want to throw in LGBT, you want to throw in the lack of education. I mean, there are more negative impacts on kids these days and adolescents than there are positive things. Kids don't go out and join sports teams anymore. They don't join organizations and clubs. Now, it's not a one size fits all. There are people obviously that go out and do band, or they do track, or they do sports, or they do drama. They do different things. But more and more people are drawn to social media. More and more people on social media are getting bolden and brazen, and they're attacking people, and they're calling for the death of people because you disagree with what they have to say. And they continue to go on and think that they're justified in harassing and bullying people. And they do it behind a private account so no one can access or see them. And they're pounding away, these keyboard cowards, because they don't have the ability to go out there and be productive in society because they've been drawn to the world of social media and some of these other things. The marijuana, the vape, all this other stuff. Vaping is another thing you could get into with the assault on young people. But it's a problem that's becoming more and more. It's bigger. It's greater. It's more problematic. What are you going to do about it? That's the question. That's going to take personal responsibility because the government's not going to be able to do it. Big tech's not going to do it. Sure, your schools limit and try to do what they can to limit technology, but it's a losing battle. I go into classrooms all the time, and despite what you say, they're sneaking on their phones. Even some schools that have tried to take phones away from kids during the school day, legal challenges from parents of all people, saying they don't want their kids' phones being taken away. It's a affront on their constitutional rights. Sick world we're getting down into. Well, on another note, the College World Series has come and gone. Another successful College World Series for the city of Omaha. If you ever get a chance to go, you should go. I like to go every year and enjoy some games. It's a lot of fun. It can be pricey. I don't pay the pricey ticket prices, so I never go to the championship series. But a lot of people will wait to the last minute to see if their team makes it to the championship series. Then they'll fork out a bunch of money and make it to Omaha. However, if you've been paying attention to airlines and flights and things, you've noticed the last few months that flying and traveling via airlines has become hugely problematic. I mean, it's been horrific. So many people making last-minute trips to the finals have faced problems with their travels, according to news reports all over the place. So one guy wanted to go to Omaha to see his team play. He was coming from, I think he was a Tennessee Vols fan. So he was on the plane. The plane pulled out of the terminal, sat on the tarmac for about 20 minutes. Mechanical issues, flight gets canceled. Rescheduled for Sunday. His tickets are for Friday. Can't go Sunday. Your World Series is over by then. Actually, it was Saturday because there was no games on Friday, so his tickets were Saturday. So he was going to miss the game. So in the course of all this chaos, he realizes that there are other Tennessee Volunteer fans on the flight that has now been canceled. Strangers now band together. What do? They rent a car and they drive. They drive the 13 hours to get to the baseball village in Omaha. Another guy flying out of Nashville, his flight was delayed. He got stuck in Chicago, missed that connecting flight. They rerouted him to Kansas City instead of Lincoln, Nebraska, which is about, let's just call it an hour away from Omaha. Well, instead of missing his game, he got to Kansas City, drove the 3 hours, and got to Omaha. And then a third party that's in this report talks about a guy that was coming from New Orleans. Somehow he missed his flight in New Orleans, ended up having to go to St. Louis. Apparently his dad lives in St. Louis, so he got a flight to St. Louis, and then his dad drove him the 8 hours to get to Omaha. So all these people had one thing in common, an obstacle to overcome. And their obstacle was getting to Omaha. And they found a solution. They found something to overcome that obstacle, problem solving. And that's another thing that we have a hard time doing in America, especially young people, problem solving. People don't know how to solve problems. Well, in this case, obviously, some of these people were really motivated because it was either money or it was the fact that Tennessee had never won a national championship. And I think it was the 1950s, maybe even 1950, the last time they were there. So a lot of things were pushing their fanaticism to get them to Omaha, but they found a way. Can't we do that? Can't we find a way to overcome some obstacles, some hurdles, things that we think are going to keep us from doing something? Nick Vujicic is a guy who was born without arms and legs, and he's been able to accomplish a lot in life.
I had some tantrums of saying, I can't do this. This is too hard. When I was a kid and comparing myself to everyone else and saying, I can't do it. I'll never be able to do that. My parents always sat me down and said, look, Nick, yes, there are things that you can't do, but don't say I can't do it. Ask yourself, how can I do it? You know, there's ways around it. You can get from one side of the mountain to another, but you don't just have to walk over it. Maybe you can go underneath it or around it, or there's always ways in achieving the same goal. The way that I've achieved in my life doesn't always look the same for everyone else. But the key to that success was I believed in myself. If someone else could do something, then I could try and work out how. It starts with believing in yourself.
You've got to believe in yourself. If you do not believe in yourself, how are you going to become successful? How are you going to do anything? Other people are going to believe in you, but if you don't believe in yourself, you're not going to get anywhere. Don't say, I can't. Say, how can I? Find a solution. I can't get to Omaha. My flight canceled. Well, how can I get to Omaha? I'll rent a car. Maybe I'll rent a car with a couple strangers. Maybe I'll go to St. Louis and have my dad Uber me to Omaha. Whatever it is, find a solution. And that's what we got to do with some of these things that we even talked about earlier. Instead of sitting there and just casting blame or putting warnings on things or whatever, you got to take action. You got to overcome it. If your child's having a tantrum, what can you do to raise up the kid not to have tantrum? Don't just throw them an iPad and say, here, shut up. Don't let the iPad or the technology raise your kid. You raise your kid. If you got a problem with something in politics, instead of going to social media or running to the streets and protesting like they're doing in France right now, maybe you should come up with a solution, grassroots level. If you're wanting to do something, maybe get a better job, find a better house to live in, better living arrangements. Maybe you want to avoid the toxic air and the polluted water that now all of a sudden, because Chevron deference went away, we're now all experiencing. Well, maybe you should do something. Create something. And in fact, instead of going to social media and just ranting about whatever it is, maybe you should go to a country that really does experience polluted waters and toxic air and try to find a way to help them. Put other people first. Maybe you should go and try to help kids in their academics. Maybe try to help that young pregnant teen make good decisions, right decisions, not just push a political ideology upon them and kowtow to the billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry that's Planned Parenthood. There are ways to achieve a goal. You just got to find them, because mindset is everything. If you think you can't, you won't. But if you think you can, you probably will.
If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win, but you think you can't, it is almost a cinch you won't. If you think you'll lose, you've lost. For out in this world we find success begins with a person's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win the prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man. But sooner or later, the person who wins is the one who thinks he can.
Mindset. You think you can. Chances of success far greater. You have to think high to rise. You got to be able to know, or at least believe in yourself, that you can achieve great things if you really want to. If you're defeated, how can you do anything? How can you accomplish anything? If you have no self-confidence, and self-confidence could be in the smallest of things. Try to speak in front of a classroom. Try to speak in front of an audience. The fear of public speaking is one of the biggest phobias around. A lot of people can't do it. A lot of people won't do it. But what if you got up and you were able to give a speech in front of somebody? Give a speech advocating for kids and their education or lack thereof at a school board meeting. Now you're making an impact and you're overcoming your own fear. But you've got to be able to think high to rise. It's all about the state of mind. What's your state of mind? You got to dream big. If you're not dreaming big, if your dreams aren't so big that you're like, man, how am I going to be able to attain this? Maybe you're not dreaming big enough. And when you get to that, how am I going to be able to achieve this? It's not like, okay, how am I going to be able to achieve this? Therefore, I'm not going to do it. It's how am I going to be able to achieve this? Here's my plan to attempt it. And you keep going and you keep trying and you keep doing something, because failure only happens when you stop trying. You might be trying something 80, 90, 100 times. Every time you learn a certain way not to do it, but that next time could be the time that you are successful. The next time could be the time that you discovered how to make it work, but you stopped one time before and now you've failed because you gave up. You got to keep pushing. Got to keep finding a way if you really want it. If you really want it, you will find a way. Find ways to achieve a goal. Believe in yourself. Think about David and Goliath. People always use that term in everything. Little David slays the big giant Goliath with basically a slingshot and a stone. 5 stones, slingshot, boom, game over for the giant. And people use that analogy all the time when something perceived as little defeats something big. But it's not always the strongest. It's not always the fastest. Sometimes it's the smartest. Sometimes it's the person that practiced or prepared themselves for it that becomes successful. Those are the people that make it. So whatever your problem is, and I use the College World Series and these examples of people overcoming their travel experiences, their travel obstacles to get to where they want to go, and that was the College World Series, as an analogy to be, you can do whatever it is. It might take some creative thinking. It might take some ingenuity. It might take some going back to the drawing board over and over and over again. It might take some trying to get some advice from other people, putting a support group around you, talking to somebody, whatever it is, good, bad, ugly. You can overcome it if you want to and if you believe in yourself. This is Two Steps Ahead Podcast, encouraging you to take your passion, make it happen, let yourself be great. Check out our website, radiowarp.com. That's radio, W-A-R-P, radiowarp.com. You can click on the Two Steps Ahead podcast logo, and all of our past shows pop up. They're all there in video form. If you click on them, it takes you to our Rumble page, and you can look at them there if you want to. We're also on YouTube. If you notice that orange banner that goes across the center of the page, you click on that, takes you to our audio page. And that's our SoundCloud page. You can actually download them and take them with you on the go. So you can access the show through our website, radiowarp.com, radio, W-A-R-P, radiowarp.com. There's also a couple other shows and things that you might find entertaining there as well. So you might want to check it out. So we're pretty much on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartMedia, Apple Podcast. You can do an internet search, TWO, Two Steps Ahead Podcast, and our show pops up. So we're pretty easy to find. You can email the show, twostepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com. That's twostepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com. And we're also on social media at Instagram and Facebook with TWO, Two Steps Ahead Podcast. So we're pretty easy to find. If you want to be really fancy, just say, hey, Siri, hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play TWO Two Steps Ahead Podcast, and our show pops up. So we're pretty easy to find. But when it comes down to it, are you going to just go with the status quo? Just allow kids to be a political pawn in society? Or are you going to actually do something to protect them? Are you going to do something to have common sense, logic, and reason in your approach to protecting them? Are you going to monitor social media, not cave to the tantrums of the kids, no matter what age they are? Because adolescents will tantrum and throw their tantrum too. But what is it that you're going to do? Or you're going to just allow it to be status quo and see your child, whether it be their education, whether it be their exposure to negative things that could adversely affect them? Are you going to let it continue? Or are you going to stand up and be like, no, I'm going to protect my kids. And I want to make sure that they have the best possible environment for success in life. And if you do that, then your child will be set up for success. It'll be up to them, but they'll have a better chance at success if you prepare them for it. And then what's your mindset? Is your mindset negative? Well, you're probably instilling that in the people around you, especially your kids. If you have a mindset that allows you to believe in yourself, imagine that. Imagine having a mindset where you believe in yourself, where you look at problems and you try to solve them, where you have a state of mind that you think high to rise. You take your passion, you make it happen, you bring out your inner greatness. You dare to say, I can, and you look for those solutions. You find ways to achieve your goal. And you're maybe not the strongest, maybe you're not the fastest, but you're still successful in all of this. And you're dreaming big. Imagine taking all that and passing it on to your children or to the next generation. Now you're starting to have a positive impact, not only on society and not only on the people around you, but perhaps in your community and so on. And it goes from there. Two Steps Ahead Podcast, encouraging you to take your passion, make it happen, let yourself be great. I'm Son Edom. Hey, thanks for listening. Do tell a friend. And until next time, God bless.